Well, good morning. I'm Stephen Furr. I'm your interim minister. You're going to have to get used to me. I've got a few things to say kind of off the top, which are, as you'll soon discover, my partner Carol and I went to the Eclipse a couple of last week. So, and I felt I had to preach on it because I went, you know. So, but I have a regular program. I'm going to try the interim ministry program that I'm going to try to share with you and help cajole you into embracing and following through with, and that dictates some of what I'll be preaching on over the weeks ahead. So, but before getting too heavy into it, I thought next week I'm going to preach on what I call sources, which is basically where am I coming from. So you can get an idea, you know, what to dismiss or how to evaluate what I'm having to say. And so if you want to know where I'm coming from, and I actually start geographically with Northeast Ohio, come next week. The following week is the water communion, I guess. That's what your tradition is. And most of our churches, that Sunday after Labor Day, a homecoming kind of a thing, and everybody gets together. And I'm going to try to rearrange the chairs a little bit. And that's symbolic also for I'm going to try to shake things up generally, which isn't to say I do it for the sake of doing it. But one of the things that does happen is with interims, well, with new ministries, okay, so you've had probably about half the members, believe it or not, have only known Lucas. And so when the new minister eventually shows up and she decides or he decides that, oh no, we're going to switch this order of service around a little bit, you'll notice there's slight variations. But in the next few weeks, they're going to be serious. And I do that mostly because I want to take the heat for that. I don't want the new minister to come in and say, well, you can't change that. You know, Elizabeth Selig Jones wrote that iconic chalice lighting, and it's iconic. We always do it. No, we don't have to always do it. There's a freedom of the pulpit. In fact, the freedom to design and execute the liturgy is the one area in Unitarian Universalist congregational life where the minister of record has dictatorial control. So be prepared. Now, I do honor I try to honor the customs and traditions of each congregation. So if it's just hurts your heart to see things go, you're welcome to try to influence me. Anyway, so the water communion, and then the next Sunday, the 18th of September, the four components of a healthy church. I take that from Dick Gilbert, Richard Gilbert, longtime minister in Rochester, author of Building Your Own Theology and some other stuff. And I'll go into it there. But the reason I want to say, well, this is what done looks like. This is what we're aiming at. This is what I'm aiming at. Here's what a healthy congregation looks like. This isn't to say you're not there already, but it just gives you a model for what I'm aiming at. And maybe you can help me try to get there. I hope so. But today, Eclipse. A solar eclipse is a particular kind of celestial occultation. Now, according to the 2-volume New Century Dictionary, occultation occurs when one object is hidden by another object that passes between it and the observer. The term is most often used, as Pat shared in the reading, in the world of astronomy. But it can also refer to any situation in which an object in the foreground blocks from view, occults, an object in the background. In this general sense, occultation applies whenever foreground objects obscure distant objects dynamically, as when a carnival magician tricks her audience into focusing on what she's holding up and not what she's doing in the background, as made famous by the "pay no attention to that man behind the curtain" scene from The Wizard of Oz. Occultation is most usually used to describe the relatively frequent occasions when the moon passes in front of a star during the course of its orbit around the Earth. I remember lying on my back one night with a pair of binoculars. I was at Boy Scout camp as a 15-year-old, watching a star become occulted by the moon. It was a new moon, just a sliver, but we could see a bright star near the kind of, you can extrapolate in your head, and you can see where the rest of the moon would be, and suddenly a star disappeared behind that dark moon. Now, this happens all the time. However, the same dynamic can be seen rarely with the sun, in which case it's called a solar eclipse. The moon is eclipsing the sun by occultation. I want to talk this morning about that rare celestial event and about the commonplace social and political occultation happening every day before our eyes. But first, last Monday's solar eclipse. Well, I was always wanting to see a solar eclipse. In March of 1970, my kind of traveling buddy at college, Tim Fetcher, we would hitchhike from upstate New York to Boston to New York City. He had this harebrained idea, let's go to Nantucket for the total eclipse. And I said, no, one of those rare occasions, I said, no, I've got a paper to write, I can't. So he went, and it was a great experience for him. It was astonishing because he got to Hyannis and the ferry was overloaded, they couldn't take any. Some guy standing next to him says, well, why don't we go to the airport, see if we can hitch a ride? And they did, and they did. And not moreover, he said that it was cloudy and they almost didn't do it at all, but when they got there it was still cloudy, and then the clouds parted, they saw the solar eclipse, the clouds came back. And he's gone to about 10 ever since. And about a few years later, Andrew Weil, MD, who's written quite a few books, and kind of a naturopathic, he's an MD, all right, and he teaches or leads a whole program at the University of Arizona now, but he'd written a book, The Natural Mind, which I really enjoyed as a 22-year-old, and then he was in Australia, he went to a total eclipse, and he starts raving about them. And then my good friend, another college friend, who's the building inspector in San Francisco, John Sims, has been to about 5. And so I was aware, I knew about the approaching solar eclipse 7 years ago, and I was pumped. All right, this is going to be in North America, I can go. I had to convince Carol, my dear partner, but eventually she decided to give it a chance. This is when she found out they were going to paint our house that weekend. She thought, oh, I can't stand the smell. So I'll go. Now the word eclipse itself derives from the ancient Greek root for abandonment, eklypsis, which makes sense. And the Greeks viewed the eclipse of the eclipse as the sun abandoning the earth. Other ancient cultures had their own superstitions and meaning behind the dimming of the sun. The people of Southeast Asia, excuse me, the people of Southeast Asia believed a giant frog was devouring the sun. A tradition of banging pots and drums to make a great racket is believed to date back thousands of years in ancient China, where people would try to stop the sun from being eaten by a dragon. Ancient Chinese literature has multiple references to eclipses, and none of them are favorable. They considered the sun to be a life symbol of the emperor's power. Whenever an eclipse occurred, he would begin a strict routine of fasting and prayer in order to make the sun healthy and bright again. 2 eclipses, one recorded in the year 29 and another 33 AD, were considered to be possible correlations with the crucifixion of Jesus. The death of King Henry I of England in 1135 AD was shortly after a total solar eclipse, following which the country descended into lengthy and brutal civil war. And many consider, it was an omen of these hard times to come. Even today, some people around the world, even here in the USA, view eclipses as omens. It was the Chinese who first recorded descriptions of a solar eclipse that are preserved, and this over 4,000 years ago. The Babylonians recorded an eclipse on May 3rd, 1375 BCE, and NASA believes it was they who were first able to predict future eclipses, though not with all that much accuracy. That began in the 2nd century AD with the work of the Egyptian astronomer and mathematician Claudius Ptolemy. Ptolemy's handy tables, he called them, used carefully collected data to calculate the positions of the heavenly bodies, leading to better predictions of celestial phenomena of all kinds. This continued for over 1,000 years, slightly more and more refined over the decades. It was Sir Isaac Newton's revolutionary gravitational theories that led to the first truly accurate predictions of eclipse paths, following the publication of his Principia in 1687. That's, you think of Newton as way back, but that's only 330 years ago. On average, a solar eclipse will occur at any given spot only once every 375 years. Their rarity comes from the 5-degree inclination of the moon's orbit. If the moon's orbit were matched to the Earth's, we'd see a solar eclipse once every month. Eclipses occur throughout the solar system, but the Earth-Moon dynamic is unique. And you've probably seen from Voyager or the more recent, what is it? There's a newer spacecraft that has gone, and Jupiter, and you can see all those moons, and then they'll disappear behind the Jupiter. It's an occultation. And like I say, it happens throughout the solar system and regularly all the time. But this Earth-Moon dynamic is unique for one reason in particular. The sun is about 400 times wider than the moon. And the moon just happens to be 400 times closer to our vantage point on the Earth. The result is a near perfect match for breathtaking transits. It also provides a rare view of the tendrils of the sun's corona, normally invisible due to the sun's brightness. In any case, even before convincing Carol to accompany me, I bought 2 tickets to Salt Lake City and reserved a car for the drive to Idaho. Members of my first church back in Connecticut have lived in Idaho Falls for nearly 25 years. Years ago, they offered me a standing invitation to visit them. About 8 months ago, I called and took them up on it. Come last Friday, Carol and I awoke at 4 a.m. and drove to Oakland, thence to Salt Lake City, where we spent the day touring and listening to a fabulous organ recital at the Mormon Tabernacle, and then on to Idaho Falls. And we had fun. I mean, we were there for a few days. On Saturday, there was a duck race where they took it was like a raffle, really, but they took 32,000 rubber ducks and dumped them in the Snake River. And the first one over the falls won a pickup truck. And I we didn't win. And then the next day we went to the National Park Monument Craters of the Moon, which is about an hour, a little over an hour, maybe 70 miles west. And, you know, we're going to see the moon in front of the sun. We thought, well, Craters of the Moon, we'll go get a preview. And it was pretty cool, but the thing was, and we went crawling through a cave. We didn't really expect to. We thought it was just, but after you got down there, the only way out was to keep going. So, and the Craters of the Moon was packed, and they ended up closing it for the first time, and all the staff are going, "Oh, it's never so crowded. What do you know? It's just amazing." Well, it was amazing, and it was crowded, and they closed it, and then it was less crowded. Monday morning, we lay lounge chairs out on the front driveway of Arthur and Annalise's house, adjusted our special Eclipse gazing eyewear, and got ready. By 10:15, we could see the partial eclipse beginning, and it was easy to imagine a huge frog chomping away at the hearth fire sun 93 million miles away. I mean, I'm reading all this stuff, and I'm going, well, yeah, it does kind of look like a frog took a bite. We knew that in our location, totality would begin at 11:33 and last all of a minute and 40 seconds. And thanks to Isaac Newton, the predictions were exactly correct. The whole experience was cool. The gradual darkening, the cooler temperatures, the animal agitation, it all happened just like they say. And then the moment of totality, an audible whoa is heard from people all around the neighborhood. And the very second that the sun was fully blocked, and we all took off our special glasses, the wind picked up considerably, birds fell silent, just like we've all read about, but experienced firsthand, it is amazingly powerful. And to see the corona, the upper atmosphere of the sun, usually only visible if you use special optics to dampen the intense light, to see the corona is absolutely breathtaking and reminds a body how minuscule and meager we people are in relationship to nature's grand, ever-changing panorama. Wow. Carol, reserving her judgment all along, suddenly exclaimed that yes, it measured up to all the hype. And I agree, it did. Our hosts had warned us not to try returning Monday, which was wise advice. We were going to go to that afternoon to the Potato Museum, 20 miles south in Blackfoot. Well, you know, you want to take in the local culture. But the interstate highway was a parking lot. We drove east instead toward the kind of into the foothills of the Grand Teton, stopping at a tiny store in Bone, Idaho, where we were told they'd never had so many patrons in a week, and that they had that afternoon delightfully. We didn't watch a minute of television the whole time we were in Idaho. The show outside was so much better and more interesting. Which brings me to my more metaphorical point. Eclipses are special cases of occultation, where something is obscured, hidden, by something else covering it over. My point is about the importance of, yes, paying attention to that man behind the curtain. The magician is trying to hide something. Authority, in the abstract, but also concrete authority, political authority, religious authority, has always and everywhere written the script, or tried to, when it comes to defining what's important and what bears paying attention to. It's a privilege of power, setting the agenda and choosing what to include on that agenda and what not to include. For those with few credentials and far from the halls of power or priesthood, trying to get their concerns onto the agenda is not easy. Sometimes it's almost impossible. For decades, unprosecuted lynching by vigilantes was commonplace in our country, but it was rarely reported on. A compilation made at Tuskegee Institute documents that between 1882 and 1936, there were 4,672 people lynched in the United States. The vast majority of these people were African American or, throughout the West and Southwest, Latino or Chinese. As the 20th century progressed, lynchings became less frequent and more concentrated to only the South, or the 13 states of the Confederacy, former states of the Confederacy. Now, this was thanks in large part to the dedicated work of activist reformers, men and women committed to putting the matter of terroristic lynching on our collective national agenda. Beginning in 1920, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, flew a flag from its window of its Fifth Avenue headquarters in New York City whenever a lynching took place. It was simple and stark, that flag. White letters on a black background. A man was lynched yesterday. The flag demanded that the people of Manhattan, however far they were from the American South, bear some form of witness to the racist murders taking place in their country. By the late 30s, the NAACP's efforts to publicize the barbarity of lynching bore fruit. Anti-lynching laws were passed in state after state, and in the United States House of Representatives twice. Now, those two were blocked in the Senate, but the practice of vigilante-inspired lynching was significantly curtailed. Perhaps not completely. Starting not long after events in Ferguson, Missouri, 2 years ago, a revision of their famous flag now regularly hangs a few blocks west of its former pole, emblazoned with the same white font on a black background with two additional words. A man was lynched by police yesterday. Last Sunday night, Carol and I went to a concert at the Idaho Falls Unitarian Universalist Church, a concert by UU hymnist Jim Scott, who wrote the Gather the Spirit that we just sang, our opening hymn. It was a tribute to the late Unitarian songwriter and minstrel and activist Pete Seeger, and led by Jim, and led beautifully. He has a tendency to talk on, but it was still a very good concert and a very, very meaningful collection of songs. The state of Idaho, as probably many of you know, has had right-wing survivalists and white supremacists since the 1980s, and somewhat of a problem, although also curtailed by political activists in that state. The Idaho Falls Unitarian Universalist Church proudly displays a Black Lives Matter banner across their front door, a banner that's been torn up and carried off repeatedly, though the church itself has not been vandalized, just the banner. We were proud to listen and be inspired by the music and lyrics of Pete Seeger, feeling quite secure, I might add, in that lovely church surrounded by kind, hopeful people. This past year has been a painful, numbing one for so many people with progressive social and political views, but even more broadly by people with aspirational hearts and consciences. People like my suffragist, Republican, Unitarian paternal grandmother, whose commitment to the democratic experiment inspired in her a mission to make and remake our country always into a more perfect union, as the preamble to the Constitution invites us to all do. That's what the democratic experiment requires, she'd say to me sternly. And it's up to you to keep it going. Especially upsetting has been the ascendancy, not so much of a conservative political order, my grandmother might have approved of that, but instead of the ascendancy of a vulgar, crude, and debasing behavioral and cultural order. The old school white shoe firm order superseded, eclipsed, as it were, by hoodwinkery, sloganeering, and bullying. But here's the thing. Eclipses are occultations of the sun. President Trump has been pleased with a propagandistic image that's been making rounds on the internet, an image of him superimposed on a portrait of Barack Obama, eclipsing him. And he's right in a way. Donald Trump has a star on Hollywood Boulevard. He understands imagery and how to manipulate images. He understands it very well. But the laws of nature are such that all occultations are momentary. Before long, reality brings everyone back to their senses, be it the 2008 global economic collapse, the Tet Offensive, the Holocaust. These things make clear what's really going on over here, no matter what's going on here. President Trump captures our attention by his look-at-me hyper-narcissistic antics. He's comfortable in the crosshairs of public notoriety, indeed inhales it. And the man behind the curtain that he asks us to pay no attention to, the people who want to open up our national monuments to private mining interests, private military supply contractors making a killing out of America's Asian wars, Russian oligarchs. Occultations, remember, only last for so long. Whatever's behind the screen will eventually be revealed. If you see it already, consider yourself cursed and blessed with political insight. The insight that, in a civic sense, as citizens of this republic, we are responsible for keeping the democratic experiment alive, and that means striving continuously to make America a more perfect union, as our hearts and consciences and our political and historical acumen dictate. And consider this, too, that as your interim minister for the next couple of years, probably, so that you don't run me out of town on a rail, I will do my best to hold you to this goal and do my best to be honest. This is my pledge to you. Last Monday's solar eclipse was the most watched, studied, and analyzed one in history. My friends Tim Fetcher, John Sims, and Andrew Weil were all correct. Being under the penumbra of a total solar eclipse is definitely an altered state. And those three and others who go chasing after him, they call them penumbrophiles. And I can see why. Honestly, it was awesome. Let us hope and pray that all those who shared that experience have come back transformed for the better. That is, in support of the common good and of our common, hopeful, beloved future. May it be so. Amen.